My name is Eric Brunson, and today I will be going over what happened to Jimmy Hoffa. Today we are going to go over the early life of Jimmy Hoffa, Jimmy Hoffa's involvement with the Teamsters, then his involvement with mob ties, and then eventually what led to his disappearance. The early life of Jimmy Hoffa. Jimmy Hoffa was born on February 14th, 1913 in Brazil, Indiana. He was the son of a coal miner who had passed away to lung cancer when Jimmy was only 7. After that, he had to leave the school at the age of 14 and work as a stock boy and a warehouseman for several years in order to support his family. During those years is where he realized how poorly the workers were being mistreated and how they were not being paid what they were supposed to be getting paid, and this is when he began his first union organizing campaign and activities. Was in the early 1930s. 1932, Jimmy Hoffa led a huge strike which was successful enough to higher wages all across the warehouse and the company that he was working for. He then joined the Teamsters, and later in 1932, he later joined the Teamsters in 1932, and he was assigned as a union head organizer. He had his first strike, which coincidentally enough was to higher wages as well, different strike from earlier. And the Teamsters was a union that represents the truck drivers and those in the trucking industry. If anybody knows all the packages you get, Amazon Prime, from FedEx or anywhere, everything comes through an 18-wheeler. So maybe some of the things we have today through 18-wheelers would not have been possible without Jimmy Hoffa advocating for the Teamsters. And these guys meant business. They were what people called firebombs, willing to do anything and whatever it is in order to get what they want. Jimmy was known to get in your face and bust your head open, and like the quite literal sense and term. He would use that to aggravate people because he was involved with the mobsters. He would use the mobsters to aggravate and assault and, possibly commit murder in order to get what the union or the Teamsters need. In 1952, Jimmy Hoffa was elected as the international vice president for the Teamsters. 5 years later, in 1957, is when he was made president of the organization. At the same time, he had a lawsuit with the government, and he was going under investigation with ties to the mafia. So the government was already on him when he was having his mob ties. Jimmy Hoffa responded to this with, "These organized crime figures are the people you should know if you're going to avoid having anyone interfere with your strike. And that's what we know them for. We make it our business, and the head of any union who didn't would be a fool." 1964, Jimmy Hoffa was convicted for fraud, jury tampering, and witness intimidation. His sentence was 13 years at the Lewisburg, Pennsylvania pen, but was paroled by President Nixon in 1971. He was jailed 18 times over his career as a Teamster. 18 times. Known throughout the trucking industry as a tough and knowledgeable bargainer, Hoffa successfully centralized administration and bargaining in the international office of the union. He also played a key role in the creation of the first national freight hauling agreement. His efforts helped make the Teamsters the largest labor union in the United States and the world's strongest. So, Jimmy Hoffa's mob ties. Jimmy Hoffa was notorious for constantly having either friends, brothers, associates, people he hung out with after hours. They were all linked to some sort of organized crime, which you have to think, if you're not in organized crime, why are you hanging around everyone that does organized crime? Paying the mob for extra hands. This just simply was reiterating the fact that I said earlier about them having the mob hands to go out and, put fear in people, assault them, aggravate them, possibly murder, beat them up, anything to get them onto the Teamster side. Upsetting the mob. Along with the mob help that he was getting, you are also supposed to follow the every whim and will of the mob. Jimmy Hoffa did not see it that way. He saw it as the mob was at his disposal, which was mistakenly probably the reason of his death. His disappearance. So, the start of his disappearance, Jimmy Hoffa the start of his disappearance was after Jimmy Hoffa was paroled, and he wanted to be the president again of the Teamsters. But the people that were already in the Teamsters union while Jimmy Hoffa was locked up did not particularly agree with the way that Jimmy Hoffa was running it, because the mobsters were in charge of the union. They did not like that mobsters were in charge of the union, so they did not want Jimmy Hoffa back as the president. And then on July 30th, 1975, Jimmy's meeting he had was with the head of a mob family, and this was to deal with problems that were not getting solved in the Teamsters Union, things that the mob wanted done but Jimmy would not do, and he wouldn't submit to their will. So they had a meeting on July 30th, 1975, and from there, Jimmy Hoffa was never seen or heard from again. And this is the start of the conspiracies. He disappeared from his restaurant in suburban Detroit under severe circumstances that have never been fully determined. He's said to have had an appointment at the restaurant with Anthony Provenzano, a New Jersey Teamsters official and former head mafia figure, and Anthony Giccioloni, a Detroit mobster, both later denied having encountered Hoffa and who was never seen again. Hoffa was then legally declared dead in 1982. When Hoffa disappeared, there had been many people coming up with their own conspiracy theories, and one of those was Mr. Charles O'Brien. He came under suspicion with the news accounts and some law enforcement authorities speculating that he drove Hoffa to his fateful encounter. Mr. O'Brien, although his accounts of the events surrounding the disappearance were sometimes vague, maintained that he had not been involved and would never, ever have sold out his friend and mentor, Jimmy Hoffa. This is the beginning of all conspiracies. This is likely the most sound theory, considering not only were there specks of blood from Hoffa found in O'Brien's car, there were also strains of hair found in his car as well. The next theory we have is the Detroit meat goes bad. This theory states that Jimmy Hoffa was taken to a meat processing plant where he was tortured. And by tortured, I mean they pulled his fingernails out, they charred his skin, and they removed members of his body until he could fit into an industrial meat grinder, which he was then ground up into meat and either distributed throughout Detroit and fed to dogs. As this theory stands, it is much harder to prove, and it's probably not as likely as the other ones. It's a little out there. But a fun fact about that, the mob family that Jimmy Hoffa had last seen and was disappeared is the same mob family that owns the entire meat processing plant at which he was presumed ground up. You know, it's not 100% plausible. You can't prove it, but it does make you think. The New York Giants Stadium. This theory states that after Jimmy Hoffa was murdered and then was mixed in with concrete that was used to construct the New York Giants Stadium in East Rutherford, it is said that he was buried under Section 107. This theory comes from the mafia hitman named Charles Allen, who actually served prison time with Hoffa before going into federal witness protection. The 55-gallon drum theory. This theory comes from mobster Philip Moscato, who claimed Hoffa was buried in a barrel at his toxic dump under the Pulaski Skyway in Jersey City. This was told to an investigative reporter by the name of Dan Moldia. Moldia's belief is that Hoffa was shot dead at the Wixom farm and then transferred to New Jersey in a barrel, which was then buried in toxic soil. Still really hard to prove. There's no way you'll be able to find evidence for that. Mystery remains unsolved. Still today, there's no conclusive evidence found over Jimmy Hoffa. There probably never will be, because it was, 60 years ago. Yes, we've come a long way in technology, but you got to think of everything that's decayed or degraded over 60 years. The chances of us finding out exactly what happens probably never will. Some of our best guesses and theories are mob books. There have been countless movies, mob books, magazine postings, everyone saying that they knew Jimmy Hoffa personally, and they may or may not have an idea as to what happened in his disappearance. One of the more popular ones you might have seen is called The Irishman on Netflix. That was also done over Jimmy Hoffa's right-hand man. The best theory is definitely, it's still going to be the Charles O'Brien theory. although he's legally named dead, Charles O'Brien driving Jimmy Hoffa to his death and not only having the blood in his car as well as the hair, it's probably the most likely theory, but considering those are the only two things that we have, that is not enough to link Jimmy Hoffa to anyone's murder or homicide. So nobody knows exactly what happened anymore, but this was my essay over what happened to Jimmy Hoffa. I think the mob did it.